I stood up to a Karen while watching the Northern Lights. Didn't expect it to shake up our whole town. My wife Sarah and I had always dreamed of seeing the Northern Lights. Living in rural Pennsylvania, we never thought we'd have the chance without traveling to Alaska or Iceland. But on that crisp autumn evening, the solar winds aligned just right, and the aurora borealis decided to grace our little corner of the world with its presence. I remember the day started like any other. I woke up, kissed Sarah good morning, and headed to work at the local hardware store. It was a slow day, with only a handful of customers coming in for drill bits and wood stain. I was restocking the shelves when my phone buzzed with a news alert: rare Northern Lights display expected tonight in Pennsylvania. My heart skipped a beat. I immediately called Sarah, who was equally excited. We made hasty plans to go aurora hunting that night, promising each other we'd find the perfect spot to witness this once-in-a-lifetime event. As the sun began to set, Sarah and I piled into our trusty old Subaru, armed with blankets, thermoses of hot cocoa, and more excitement than we knew what to do with. We drove aimlessly for a while, searching for a place with an unobstructed view of the northern sky. The problem was, everyone else seemed to have the same idea. Every lookout point and scenic overlook was packed with cars and eager sky watchers. Maybe we should head back towards home, Sarah suggested after our third failed attempt to find a spot. There might be somewhere quieter near us. I nodded, feeling a bit deflated but still hopeful. As we drove back, I remembered a small park not far from our house. It wasn't much, just a few picnic tables and a playground, but it did have a large open field that might work for stargazing. "Let's try Willow Creek Park," I said. "It's not ideal, but it might be our best shot." Sarah agreed, and we made our way there. As we pulled into the parking lot, I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was 9:30 p.m., and a small sign at the entrance informed us that the park closed at 10 p.m. We had 30 minutes. "Well, it's not much time, but it's better than nothing," I said as we got out of the car. We walked hand in hand to the center of the field, our eyes fixed on the northern horizon. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The sky remained stubbornly ordinary, with only the usual stars twinkling above us. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a faint green glow began to appear. It was like a thin, shimmering curtain being drawn across the sky. Sarah squeezed my hand tighter, and I heard her gasp softly beside me. "Is that?" she whispered. "I think so," I replied, my voice equally hushed. We stood there, transfixed, as the aurora grew stronger. The green became more vibrant, and ribbons of pink and purple began to dance alongside it. It was unlike anything we'd ever seen, a symphony of light painting the heavens above our little Pennsylvania town. Time seemed to stand still as we watched the celestial show. We pointed out different shapes to each other, marveling at how the lights seemed to move and pulse. It was magical, romantic, and humbling all at once. Before we knew it, Sarah's watch beeped softly. It was 9:55 p.m., 5 minutes until the park closed. "We should probably head back to the car," I said reluctantly. Sarah nodded, her eyes still fixed on the sky. "Just one more minute?" I smiled and pulled her close. One more minute. We savored those last moments, trying to burn the image of the aurora into our memories. Finally, with heavy hearts but full spirits, we began walking back to our car. As we approached the parking lot, we noticed another vehicle had pulled in. It was a sleek, black SUV that looked out of place in our rural community. As we got closer, I could make out a large sticker on the rear windshield, a campaign advertisement for someone running for the PA House of Representatives. We were just about to get into our car when the driver's window of the SUV rolled down. A woman's face appeared, her expression a mix of annoyance and suspicion. "What the hell are you guys doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp in the quiet night air. I was taken aback by her hostile tone but tried to remain polite. "We were just looking for a clear spot to view the northern lights," I explained innocently. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Well, that's a good reason for me to call the police on you because you're not supposed to be here." I felt a flicker of anger at her threat but kept my cool. "Ma'am, we made sure it was legal to enter the park. We're leaving now that it's closing time. There's no need to involve the police." She scoffed, clearly not believing me. It was then that I got a better look at her campaign sticker. The name Elizabeth Hartley was prominently displayed, along with slogans about family values and protecting our community. A plan began to form in my mind. I knew our district was a crucial swing area in the upcoming election, and I had already decided I wasn't voting for Hartley or her party. But this woman didn't know that. Putting on my best confused voter face, I asked, "Is that Elizabeth Hartley on your sticker? I don't know much about the candidates. What can you tell me about her?" The woman's demeanor changed instantly. Her scowl transformed into a practiced smile, and she launched into what was clearly a well-rehearsed pitch. "Oh, Elizabeth is just wonderful," she gushed. "She's fighting for lower taxes, more jobs, and keeping our traditional values strong. She's exactly what this district needs to turn things around." I nodded along, pretending to be interested. Sarah caught on to what I was doing and played along, asking a few questions of her own about Hartley's stance on education and healthcare. The woman, who introduced herself as Patricia, was more than happy to extol Hartley's virtues. She went on for several minutes about how Hartley would clean up the streets and bring back the good old days. When Patricia finally paused for breath, I saw my opportunity. "Wow, that's really something," I said, trying to sound impressed. "You know, I wasn't planning on voting this year. Didn't think it mattered much. But after hearing all that, I think you've convinced me to register and vote." Patricia beamed, clearly feeling she'd won a convert. "That's wonderful. I'm so glad I could help inform you about." I cut her off. "Oh, I'm sorry. I should have been clearer. You've convinced me to register and vote against Hartley and whatever party she's in." The change in Patricia's expression was instantaneous and almost comical. Her mouth fell open, and she stared at me in stunned silence for a moment. Then, her face contorted with rage. You, she sputtered, struggling to find words. When she did, what came out was a string of racial slurs and insults that made my blood boil. I didn't bother listening to the specifics of her tirade. Instead, I calmly said, "Democracy's a bitch, isn't it? Maybe you should mind your own business next time," and rolled up my window. As we drove away, I heard a loud pop behind us. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw Patricia's SUV listing to one side. It seemed she had a flat tire. Karma, it appeared, worked quickly sometimes. Sarah and I drove home in silence for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. Finally, she turned to me and said, "Well, that was something." I couldn't help but laugh. Yeah, I guess our quiet night of stargazing turned into a bit more of an adventure than we bargained for. "Do you think we should have handled it differently?" Sarah asked, a note of concern in her voice. I thought about it for a moment. Honestly? No. We weren't doing anything wrong, and she had no right to threaten us or spew that hateful garbage. Sometimes people need to face consequences for their actions. Sarah nodded slowly. "I suppose you're right. It's just sad that there are people like that out there, trying to divide us." "True," I agreed. "But tonight also showed us something beautiful that brought us together. I'd say the Aurora wins in that contest, hands down." We spent the rest of the drive home reliving the magical moments we'd witnessed in the sky, refusing to let Patricia's negativity taint our experience. The next morning, I woke up early, still buzzing from the events of the previous night. I made coffee and sat down at my computer, feeling compelled to share our story. I opened up a local community forum and began typing, recounting our adventure under the Northern Lights and our encounter with Patricia. As I wrote, I realized that the experience had affected me more deeply than I'd initially thought. It wasn't just about seeing a rare natural phenomenon or standing up to a bully. It was about the contrast between the unifying beauty of the aurora and the divisive ugliness of prejudice and political hostility. I finished my post and hit submit, then went about my day. When I checked back that evening, I was surprised to see that my story had garnered quite a bit of attention. Dozens of comments had poured in, with many people sharing their own experiences of seeing the Northern Lights and encountering both kindness and hostility in our community. One comment, in particular, caught my eye. It was from a local journalist named Mike, asking if I'd be willing to be interviewed for a story he was writing about the Aurora event and its impact on our area. After discussing it with Sarah, I decided to agree. Mike met us at a local coffee shop the next day. He was a friendly, middle-aged man with a notebook full of questions. We recounted our experience, careful to focus more on the beauty of the Aurora than on our negative encounter with Patricia. "You know," Mike said thoughtfully after we'd finished our story, "I've been covering local politics for years, and I've noticed a trend. It seems like the more divided we become politically, the more we lose sight of the things that should bring us together, like a rare natural event like this." I nodded in agreement. That's exactly how we felt. Standing there under those lights, none of the usual divisions seemed to matter. We were just humans, in awe of something greater than ourselves. Mike scribbled furiously in his notebook. "That's a powerful sentiment. Do you mind if I quote you on that?" "Not at all," I replied. As we were wrapping up the interview, Mike's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and let out a low whistle. "Well, this is interesting," he said. It seems Elizabeth Hartley just issued a statement condemning recent acts of hostility and bigotry by some of her supporters. She's calling for unity and respect across party lines. Sarah and I exchanged a look. Could our encounter with Patricia have had something to do with this? Mike caught our expressions. Is there something more to your story that you haven't told me? He asked, his journalistic instincts clearly piqued. We hesitated for a moment before filling him in on the details of our run-in with Patricia. Mike listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. This is quite a story, he said when we finished. Would you be comfortable with me including these details in my article? It could spark an important conversation in our community. Sarah and I discussed it briefly. We were hesitant to draw more attention to ourselves or to potentially inflame political tensions. But we also felt that the truth of what happened was important. You can include it, I finally told Mike. But please focus on the larger issue rather than on us specifically. This isn't about individuals, it's about how we treat each other as a community. Mike nodded in understanding. I'll do my best to handle it sensitively, he promised. True to his word, when the article came out a few days later, it was a thoughtful piece about how the Aurora had brought our community together, with our story serving as an example of the challenges we still faced in overcoming division. The response to the article was overwhelming. Our local online forums were buzzing with discussion, and I even got a few phone calls from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, thanking us for speaking up. But not all the attention was positive. A few days after the article was published, I was at work when I got a call from Sarah. Her voice was shaky. Someone left a note on our door, she said. It's not friendly. I rushed home to find Sarah holding a crudely written note that was filled with the same kind of slurs and threats that Patricia had hurled at us. My first instinct was anger, but as I looked at Sarah's worried face, I knew we needed to handle this carefully. We decided to report the note to the local police. The officer who came to take our statement, a young woman named Officer Chen, was sympathetic and professional. We take these kinds of threats seriously, she assured us. We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood and investigate this thoroughly. As she was leaving, Officer Chen paused. You know, she said, I saw the northern lights that night too. It was beautiful. It's a shame that some people can't see past their own anger to appreciate something like that. Her words stuck with me long after she left. The contrast between the beauty we'd witnessed and the ugliness we were now dealing with was stark. But I refused to let the latter overshadow the former. In the weeks that followed, our community seemed to be at a crossroads. The incident had brought long simmering tensions to the surface. Some people rallied around us, organizing community meetings to discuss how to bridge the divides in our town. Others doubled down on their partisan positions, seeing our story as an attack on their beliefs. Through it all, Sarah and I tried to stay focused on the positive changes we were seeing. New friendships were formed across old dividing lines. People who had never been politically active before were getting involved in local issues. There was a sense that our little town was waking up to the importance of community and understanding. As the election approached, the atmosphere grew tense. Elizabeth Hartley's campaign, perhaps in response to the negative attention from our incident, had shifted its tone. Her new slogans emphasized unity and community spirit, though her actual policy positions remained largely unchanged. On election day, Sarah and I went to our local polling place together. As we stood in line, I noticed a familiar face a few people ahead of us. It was Patricia. She saw us too, and for a moment, I tensed, expecting another confrontation. But instead, she approached us slowly, her expression unreadable. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What I said that night was inexcusable. I've done a lot of thinking since then, and, well, I'm sorry. I was stunned. This was the last thing I had expected. Sarah recovered first, offering Patricia a small smile. Thank you for saying that, she said. It means a lot. Patricia nodded awkwardly, then turned and hurried away. As she left, I noticed that her car no longer sported the Hartley campaign sticker. After we cast our votes, Sarah and I took a walk through the park where we had watched the aurora that fateful night. The sky was ordinary now, just a pale autumn blue, but the memory of those shimmering lights remained vivid in my mind. You know, Sarah said as we sat on a bench overlooking the field, regardless of how the election turns out, I think our town has changed for the better. I squeezed her hand. I think you're right. It's like the aurora woke something up in all of us. As we sat there, enjoying the crisp fall air and each other's company, I realized that the true magic of that night wasn't just in the lights we saw in the sky. It was in the way it had brought our community together, forcing us to confront our differences and find common ground. The Northern Lights may have been a once-in-a-lifetime event, but the changes they inspired in our town, and in ourselves, would last far longer. And that, I realized, was the real gift of that extraordinary night under the aurora.